Hello and welcome to Low Code Campfire. This is episode number 138 for March 15, 2024. Today I hope to do a wrap up on the data visualization that happened on Low Code Cafe and also get into any other questions or things that you may be interested in discussing. And beyond that, perhaps we'll discuss some things going on internally at PlantApp. I am Dale Warner, Head of Sport for PlantApp, also joined by Patrick Anderson, our Star Technical Success Manager. This is an event we do every Friday at this hour. It's a community gathering where we get together with some larger groups and some smaller groups, but it's all skill levels welcome. If you have a question about PlantApp or low code or, well, really any kind of project, any of the projects that you're working on, usually this group is very good at providing suggestions and direction on how to move forward. So bring something to show, be ready with ideas and suggestions. We record all of them. We put them out on YouTube, so youtube.com/PlantApp. You should subscribe to every video that we put out so that you get alerts immediately. We run this agenda where we say hello and then go around the campfire. We start with first call if anyone has anything that they want to talk about. Beyond that, we'll take a look at the contributions to our community website, our community features. There are low code development playbook, talk about the things that are we're doing internally at PlantApp to come up with best practices. That's the playbook. And then sometimes we get into dark corners and ghost stories. If anyone's interested, we'll hang around for another few minutes after the hour, and we'll do Afterglow. That's where we turn off the recording and just enjoy each other for a few more minutes. So do engage, jump in, show and tell, use the chat window. We have very few guidelines, but mostly we ask if you'll mute if you've got noise going on behind you. You can submit questions and topics in advance. It's very important that you give us feedback. I learned last week that my microphone wasn't close enough, and so hopefully it's better today. So with that, we'll say hello, and stragglers coming in. Hello, Mark and Mark.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
So did anyone show up with something that they wanted to talk about? First call, what's on your mind?
I don't think I came with anything today.
Well, as is fine. Let's start with, I have one or two prepared topics, and we can go from there. Has anyone on the call been following along with our 3 episodes of data visualization on Low Code Cafe, and any discussion or feedback on that?
This is Mark. Yeah, I saw the first two, and I got started on the third one, but I haven't completed it. And I was particularly interested in the well, what you're doing with the maps is really fun, interactive. It's very nice. I've tried to do that before, and this looks a lot easier than what I was doing before. I'm particularly interested in AI interaction.
And if you're halfway through episode 3, you're probably at the spot where I'm struggling with that. But we do finally at the end get it to work. So um, the as I point out in that episode, it's the using AI as a co-star in these episodes is a challenge because it has its own personality. It does what it wants to do. But this is kind of where we ended up. I'm sharing my screen, correct?
You are.
Where we had lots and lots of map points and the ability to click in. So, for example, if we go to where's fun? Grand Junction here in Colorado. we're getting latitude and longitude, and then the AI is being queried to find out some things about what's at a nearby city. So that's where we got to. It's kind of interesting. Go ahead.
What? Oh, I was just going to say, I wonder if there's if we could ask AI to give us some sort of interim indicator that it's working. I wonder. Well, I guess it would be whether or not the it's called Leaflet, right? The
Yes.
yeah, whether or not Leaflet has that option to provide a sort of working
Yes.
indication.
So in the test that I managed, I think I mentioned that I managed to blow away my test site, getting ready for presenting this. I did. The indication that I put on here was showing the latitude. It's showing latitude, longitude, so it's doing something. And in the test site, I changed the wording a little bit. I didn't actually require AI to make that much of a JavaScript change. Um, Man, it's all running slow today. So the workflow, we coded it here in this one. And so if we can open this up and find it. So this is add a click event to place a marker. And so we say latitude, longitude. So we could say something like,
Yeah.
something like that. So at least would kind of give an indication that something was happening instead of just leaving you to wonder. But the call, if you remember, what we're doing is calling an API directly at that point. And so the API runs for however long it takes AI to come up with the answer. And then we get the callback. So I suppose if you were, if you wanted to get more sophisticated with it, you could do a call and stream the results. It's possible with the way that we've implemented chat to get the streamed results, and so it could appear as you go, but we haven't made provision for that. We just did a very simple call. Yeah.
Were as part of your process, I apologize, I didn't see the whole thing unless it's past Wednesday, but as part of your process, were you asking AI to write the API call?
Somewhat. So what we provided it, and let me pull this out into something that's big enough to see here. So what we did is, as you probably know with PlantinApp, the API has, when you design an API, it gives you the signature of how to do the call. So what I provided to AI was, hey, this is how we do a call. And so it learned based on the example that I gave it how to do the call, and then it adapted it from there.
Okay, yeah, that is a little bit of the part that I saw. And I also saw that it was often coming back with the API call a little bit malformed. It had extra characters at the beginning and extra characters at the end.
Yes.
And I wondered, uh, sorry, I just had a fleeting thought that I wonder if you were to create the structure of the API call in some other way in your workflow, and then ask AI to just fill in the important pieces that you're asking it to fill in, so that you provide the format and it provides the goodies that needs to go into it. So then you wouldn't need to worry so much about the extra characters.
Right. So if you that's what I attempted to do in this API. So for example, we're inputting latitude, longitude, and here's the chat action that does all the magic. So we gave it instructions that say, here's what we're doing, and here's what we want you to do. And this is the format of the JSON that we want. So we're trying to give it a very good example, and usually this works. But what happens is AI loves to um, provide kind of a preamble and or at least OpenAI loves to provide information before and after the answer, to be polite and to be conversational. And so trying to give it instructions to say, don't do that was the challenge that we ran into. There's probably a better way to set an expectation with the AI, but this is as simple a methodology as I've stumbled into so far. If you um, if you really needed it to be resilient, I think you could look at what comes back and don't assume that it gave back great JSON. Look for the first um, curly brace, for example, or brace bracket, so that you could so you could parse it out yourself and make sure that if it did happen to do a preamble, that you could ignore it. But um,
Yeah, I suppose you could do that extra work if it continues to come back with less than perfect syntax.
correct. It again, I think you're going to find personality in every different model within open, like, oh, this is OpenAI, and there's what, GPT-3, a couple of flavors, and GPT-4, a couple of flavors, and I would think you're going to get different characteristics of each one. GPT-4 seems to be pretty consistent, but I think in this one I'm using the Turbo Preview. It's not, it's kind of their under development variant, and so it's faster, but so this is why I wanted to use it for the presentation. But I think it's a little um, less predictable. So
Mhm.
GPT-4 might have given us the result that we were after, just slower. It's in motion,
Mhm.
right? They keep getting better. I love the GPT-4, for example. This Turbo Preview uh, is processing so much larger content that where we used to be able to do like an hour's worth of meeting, you'd have to summarize it and break it down into pieces. Now you can do it all in one chunk. So AI is a fast moving um, and you know, what you can get out of it is improving, but you've got to keep working with it. Prompt designer.
Mhm. Well, I think it's a great demo.
I, well, thank you. Um, I kind of I was happy with the pattern that we ended up with, where you could see things as a map or a chart, or and potentially you could pick other things that uh, other ways to look at the same data. So you've got data acquisition in one way versus is kind of separate from how am I going to look at it. So this could be enhanced, for example, to have a pie chart, which would be very easy with chart.js, um, a tabular view of the data, um, being able to incorporate drill downs. If I want to learn more about San Francisco, being able to click into it, that kind of thing. So it's I don't know. It's a good start to show what's possible.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Anything else on where we went here or where we could go before I move on? All right. I'm going to close that down and move on. We continue with our work with the low code development playbook. We've introduced this in prior episodes, but this is our internal list of best practices. And so our goal is to talk about one approved policy, one of our improved internal policies. Again, we're not trying to change the way you do things, but we are trying to spark a discussion. So entity naming convention is one that we've settled on internally. And then thinking about what's the pattern when we have revisions of records in a single entity. So you've got a version before and after and things like that. So let's dig into those for a minute. The entity naming convention, and should be convention, not conversion, but what the heck. Um, this policy that we've set up for our developers says that you should think about this from the purpose or from the perspective of code readability and comprehension, and keep confusion to a minimum, and being able to work together as a team. Our guidelines are to use clear and concise names. Um, avoid using the same name for multiple entities. So trying to keep them from overlapping, and then to have a nice cohesive, well understood approach for each one. So from an approach standpoint, we're saying that it should be consistent throughout the application. And so you might use a prefix approach, customer status or order status. Um, suffix approach would be status customer, status order. Um, and I don't know that it matters one to the other, but rather within a given project to do things the same way so that people can find things. So with just that much, anybody have their own standards that or reaction to how you do things in naming entities? We were saying that we need them to be descriptive, brief. You can make quite long names. It's possible to make them very long within Plant and App, but because and I guess it's probably limited by the underlying SQL, but because tables get named based on the way what you put in as the name of the entity, and SQL has maximum limits, but we're suggesting you don't really want to push that limit. It just makes it very hard to sort out what it is that you're looking at. Being consistent, we support spaces. That's there's this tendency to name things and do camel case or something like that where you're running the name altogether. Well, if you have a space in an entity name, it ends up making some of the automatic generated stuff that we do, the forms and listings and all look nicer. The menu looks nicer with spaces, and internally we take the spaces out when we name the tables and name the properties, the fields within the table. So it doesn't affect the way that it works. It only so can add clarity. Staying away from abbreviations unless they're just widely accepted and understood, just to keep the learning curve down. And then the same thing, descriptive but concise. And This one is certainly true as well. They get very, very long and they might not display correctly, which is, I guess, in pointing to a program problem. Anything controversial there? Anything that you would add to this list of how you would approach naming in entities?
That looks like a pretty good list. I particularly don't have anything to add to that.
Good. All right.
Ben probably does if we could get him to talk.
Sorry, I literally just got back in because I'm having such internet issues right now, so I totally missed what this is discussing.
Naming conventions. It's not very controversial, but it is something that we're writing down for ourselves, just letting our team know how to do names within entities. I didn't really expect much controversy or discussion on that one. I'll probably get more on the next one. So, all right,
Yeah,
here we go.
I don't use naming conventions for entities, but I do use naming conventions for variables.
Okay, you want to elaborate?
I just like I see like a lot of people when they use tokens and whatnot, they just like give it a name. What I tend to do is anything, for example, that I've generated or have retrieved from SQL. My naming convention is it always starts with the letters REC in lowercase to kind of let me know that it's my own record that I've created and I'm working with it. So that way, when I'm like accessing, let's say, a field on a form, it's the name of the field. And I know because it doesn't have REC in front of it, that's a form field.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm referencing something and it starts with REC, that's something that I've calculated or I've pulled down from SQL. That's my own personal created variable. So right off the bat, from the very beginning, looking at the naming convention of my tokens, I can immediately tell you, is that a form field that I'm getting that data from, or is that something that I calculated? And I know a lot of people don't do that. I've seen a lot of people where they just name it like, you pull down, let's say, a user record, and they'll call it user record as the token name. And I'm like, I would never do that because then when I look at that, I'm like, is that a form field called user record, or is that a SQL returned piece of data? Like I don't know where it came from. So then when it comes to debugging it, sometimes it's harder for me personally to figure out where the heck it originally came from.
Right. Absolutely. Patrick, do you know if we have a play for naming in forms,
I don't
particularly
think so.
forms, I think it sounds like a very good one to create, because I absolutely agree with Ben that if you use a naming convention like that, then the debugging gets easier. You're looking at something and you have some clue about where it came from. Is it on the form? Is it something that you've created? Is it and I suspect depending on your usage, you could get more involved. Is it so? For example, things that came directly from a SQL read, you might want to call it one thing versus things that you computed, you might, or intermediate results, those kinds of things. So I think that would be good for us to elaborate on that in another play. And I think that those things, Ben, we're working on some tools now. We're just talking about them yesterday that I think will be useful. I mean, it sounds like you're using a prefix on these names. We're doing some things that the actions that I've talked about before and added to Campfire, where you can reveal the content of of the tokens that are in your context. So being able to get them out as a name value pair, we've talked about that before. Those the official actions for Plant an App are in development, and we will be doing them. You'll be able to include them or exclude them by prefix. So, for example, if you wanted to dump all of the records that extract all the tokens that begin with REC, and ignore all the rest of them. So focusing on your REC values instead of your fields, or the other way around, you want everything except your REC variables. Those will all be possible because you're using prefixes. So,
Looking forward to it.
I am too. I think it's this is something that as a developer I wanted 5 years ago before I was working with PlantinApp. So to finally see this coming into the product and being quickly now that the product team has caught this vision, it's moving pretty quickly. So anyway, all right. So I will move on here. That was one. What's the other? Pattern for storing revisions per entity. And I suspect our big data people like Ben will have opinions on this one, but our play is saying we need a pattern when we're having a scenario where revisions need to be maintained per entity record. Yeah, we're pointing in this case to internally where we have each of these plays present, but there's newer revisions. So we have the old, we're going to keep the old version of something and the new version of something, and how do we manage that? So this play talks about some different scenarios. So storing historical rows in the same database table. So you would in one entity you would store the same thing. And we'll dig into that, I guess, in a bit, but let's look at the other scenarios. You could use two different tables, one to store the current record, and this is saying one for storing properties that don't change, another for storage of properties that can be updated. So that's interesting. And then temporal tables, which I've heard you guys talk about on this call, and not. I think Patrick has some background with that one, and so that's another scenario for doing that. So first of all, among those scenarios, or have you implemented any of these or others? How do you deal with it when you need different versions of the same thing?
Well, I'm waiting to see if anyone else says anything, but I had my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. I see. It doesn't help if you put your hand up and the host
No,
is
I didn't.
watching.
I didn't see it either.
So I do something similar to this. I go basically the first route, scenario one. So I have, in any situation where I need to retain historical information, what I basically do is all of my tables, and I've done this now for years because it's just my pattern of doing things after basically getting myself in hot water many decades ago, further back than I care to remember. So basically, every single table I create, even before PlantinApp, I always had a created on, created by, last modified on, last modified by, and a deleted flag, a deleted Boolean. So what I do in situations where I need to contain or retain rather historical information is I would insert a new record with the new data, and the previous record I would flag as deleted equal to true. So the data is still in the table, but it's not necessarily accessible because it's marked as deleted. So in my normal stored procedure that pulls data by default, it's going to pull active records only. And then if I tell it, well, I also want to pull the inactive records, then I could do a SQL statement, directly and just pull all the records. And then that way, for example, if I pull all the records for a particular customer ID or whatever, I get everything. One of them will be active, the rest of them will be deleted. And I could have by the created by date, sorted. So I know the history and the path that it took to get to the latest record. So if they wanted to go back a record or anything like that, or see history, that would always be available. That's again just how I do it. But to me, it makes it easier to put it all in one table. Using multiple tables starts splitting data and making it more cumbersome to manage. Not to mention, it's a situation of literally then cloning the record and moving it to a new table, then deleting the record on the live table, then creating a new record with the appropriate data, or updating the record if you wanted to do that, but then you have to update every single field. Like, it just becomes more cumbersome to maintain it in multiple locations. And it's just a lot more code than just saying update this record, set deleted equal to 1.
So I agree. I like the simplicity of where you're going with that. So any lessons learned that would be of value in terms of, like, for example, when you have those records commingled, you could envision if you didn't handle it right, you're getting what looks like duplicates of something because you're not paying attention to your flag, or if you didn't again, if you stuck to your pattern, you're in good shape. If you didn't stick to your pattern and you ended up with 2 active records instead of, failure to implement the delete, that kind of thing. So I just wonder what lessons learned you might have on that.
So yeah, a couple lessons learned. First and foremost is indexes. Because now you're commingling the active and the historical records, you want to make sure that your indexes are done in an efficient manner. One of them is always index your deleted flag field. That way, whenever you do where deleted equals whatever, it's using that index and it's going to make your searches much quicker. That's number one. Number two, just based off of my own usage, and again, I've learned this pattern prior to Plant an App and creating entities and how it does everything. But when I used to create my own manual tables, I used to also create with it, and I had a macro to do it, my own add procedure, delete procedure, read all procedure, things like that. And that's what I would always use. Those procedures would make sure that it was always using the deleted flag appropriately. So if I were to add a new record, the system would check to see, for example, I'm supplying all of the information, and let's say this is for a particular customer ID, and I know this table should only have 1 active record. The add procedure would actually check to see if there are any active records for that same customer ID, and if it found any, flag them as deleted, and then it would go and add the new record. So it would guarantee that the data would always be clean as long as you're using the procedures that were created for it.
So having good business logic is essentially the lesson there. Which could be done with, for example, a workflow now.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, but I wouldn't. My thing is, unless you're really, really comfortable with this type of methodology, if you're like brand new to it or just starting out, I would always suggest to use either, like I just said, a stored procedure you created or a workflow, something where you are ensuring that your business logic is going to be applied correctly. Once you've got this really under your belt, is the only time that I would turn around and say, okay, at that point, if you want to sometimes, break out of a workflow and do a direct SQL statement, if you're know what you're doing and you're comfortable with constantly using the deleted, field and stuff like that appropriately, so be it. But then that also opens up the situation of, well, in some cases you're using the canned logic that you've created, and in other cases you're using custom logic. I mean, sometimes it's necessary, but if you could keep it to one way, it's always best, because that way, if you ever need to modify it, it's one location you need to modify it rather than several.
Absolutely. So looking at this scenario too, I will admit to not having done anything except no research on this before presenting this today. So, but this is a technique that I haven't used before. And so this is interesting, saying two tables, one for storing properties that won't change, another for storing properties that can change. And the first table having a primary key, second table a foreign key, and so last inserted the second to indicate the most recent row. So this is kind of a hybrid about this deleted, but it's again more complex. And yeah, I guess they're saying that. So anybody used this technique before? Okay, Patrick, I'm going to go on to number 3, and I'm going to call on you. So.
I think unless it's down lower, I think I've implemented kind of like a version of that of number 2. It's not there's a dedicated table that this is probably results in more records, but it's a and we've talked about it actually on this call before. I think I've shown it actually. But it's a pattern to where you specifically target data that you want to be able to retrieve by columns, and you save those in a dedicated table that's just for tracking this kind of thing, and it has a the column, the table would have entity, column, or name or value, something like that. But so it basically is storing name value pairs of data, so that you can then and also who did the modification, that sort of thing. So it's another, I don't know if that's even mentioned in here, but that's another way possibly of dealing with this too. It does require, once again, it's there's some complexity there as well.
Yep. And then temporal tables. Now this is something that gets implemented at the SQL level. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. There is like under the cons, it says complex implementation, and I would say yes, it is somewhat complex, but once you learn a little bit about it, it's not too bad. But I think data volume. So that's probably the biggest con I would highlight in the cons area, is that you are storing a lot of data when you start using temporal tables. And then retrieving the historical data, there's some complexity there too, because you have to it's a whole other table basically that's storing it stores it stores a record for every single change that happens. So it gets big fast, and then but the cool thing about it is that you can query and get so what was the state of the record between this time and this time. So that's kind of a cool feature of it.
Okay. And have you seen this implemented with Flint and App?
Yeah, I've done it.
Is there any
Yeah,
particular um,
I
difficulty?
tested it. I haven't tested it recently, but I've tested it in the past. I implemented a temporal table for a plant and app entity, and then I did all kinds of things like going in and adding properties to the entity, removing properties from the entity, um, you know, making various changes. And the temporal table handled all of it. It updated it. It it worked.
Um,
So it didn't cause any problems with the interaction with LinkedIn.
I know that I have implemented something um, similar through logic rather, through low code rather than taking advantage of SQL. And it would probably, rather than inventing your own, it's probably a better idea to use the standard. So sometimes I suffer from ignorance about, not knowing. I mean, a year ago, I didn't know that temporal tables existed. So doing roll your own was probably a wrong turn that I took just because I didn't know enough. Anyway, cool. All right. Well, thanks for the feedback on that one and the ideas on that one. I think we should so this might be worth updating to incorporate a couple of those patterns. So the deleted by and the business logic ideas would probably be useful. All right. Unless there's anything else, I'll move on from that. I was going to show, I have a campfire contribution, one more added this week. From a support perspective, we had an issue where we have within our product, we have some text files sprinkled through the file system called version.txt that reveal what version has been the level of migration that's been applied. So when we go from version 1.20 to 1.21, there are some scripts that happen that say, okay, we made some structural changes. We need to execute those. And so these version text files help us keep track of what migrations have been done so that we can just do the next ones. We had a client that didn't have one of these files was missing, perhaps got deleted. The result was it was trying to supply some old migrations. And so one of our takeaways was, hey, we need to make sure that this client that all the files that they have are up to date, that they don't have any other missing ones or ones that are behind where we think that they should be. So the script goes through the file system on the server and gets the information out of so all the different version.txt files in whatever folder they might exist. I think we look in desktop modules and below to extract this, but the workflow does that. It gets the size, the content, it has value. This is the only line that's in that file, so I wanted to see what it was and when the file was modified. And so by doing that, we can see, for example, that all of the 5.26 migrations worked. There's some older ones that don't follow our numbering convention. So 1.20, this is, I think, an accurate upgrade, but other than that, we have a 5.26. So just kind of a useful thing if you want to go and work through what files exist in my file system and what's their content, that you could take a look at this workflow and adapt it to a different need. And the whole workflow export is right here. So to use it, you could just export this and import it into your system and get this exact result and then start modifying it. right. This, in fact, is a PowerShell, and so AI. I used AI to develop the PowerShell. We can take a look at what. Never mind. I don't want to wait through that. But in the same way as I've been advocating the pattern of saying this is what telling AI this is what I have and this is what I want and go do it. I use that saying with a PowerShell. I would like a PowerShell that does X, Y, and Z, and in 2 or 3 iterations, it came back with exactly what I wanted. And so the fact that PowerShell is accessible as an action from a workflow says, okay, if you want to get a PowerShell, whether or not you know how to do a PowerShell, getting AI to do it, and you read it over to make sure it's not going to do anything harmful to your instance, and then you test it out, and or perhaps test it out on a demo system that you're willing to restore if necessary, that kind of thing. So very useful. Okay. 2 weeks in a row. You guys are a little quiet. Maybe one last topic in these last 10 minutes. I've been doing some long-running low code. So trying to do some imports of a lot of data. In my particular case, I was trying to get data out of HubSpot, a lot of data out of HubSpot. And and then now that I have the data, I'm trying to convert it from the JSON where it came back from HubSpot into normalized tables. And both of those take a long time to run. And it occurs to me that there's probably a room for a nice pattern for this long running low code. So the problem that I encountered is that, I mean, the idea of being able to just run a process that goes and gets a lot of information from HubSpot or some other, whatever the source that you're trying to gather information from, that if you design it to just kind of run continuously and just assume that it's going to go from front to back, that things can happen that end up interrupting it in the middle. And things in our environment are things like an application pool reset, which happens at the IIS level and is not completely in our control or not something that we can stop. And so you're going along, you're assuming something is going to run from front to back, which is a very good assumption when you're doing something that's going to run for 2 or 10 or 60 seconds, but not when it's going to run for 10 hours. And so then you end up with something that stops in the middle, and how do you restart it? Anybody ever encounter any of this? Nope. So I just mentioned that what I did with this is several things. One is to create it in a queue type mechanism where I have a list of all the things that I want to get accomplished and process them one at a time. And so when it finishes one, it goes on to the next. But if that process gets interrupted in the middle and it didn't mark a particular item as finished, then it goes on when it's under an automation control. So when the automation comes back after a system reset, for example, an app pool reset, that it just goes back to the record it was working on and starts it over again. And so it's built with that ability to restart in mind, to know that, yeah, okay, if I've done this before, it doesn't, it'll either just do it again, and not hurt anything, or pick up exactly where it left off. Some kind of logic like that, so that it'll run long for as long as it can run, but a app will restart won't break it. One of the things that I'm running into right now is that, from a performance standpoint, getting something to run long and run as fast as it can, that ends up slowing down the website. So trying to figure out how to balance running long and not impacting performance negatively is the area where I'm working now. Trying to insert some weights into the loop so that it doesn't kill the server. Any comments? If not, Ben says he has questions. See, Ben, you missed first call, so then we went on to these other topics.
Yeah, sorry about that. I
No
don't know what
problem.
was causing my my internet hiccups, but a reboot seems to have fixed it. Um, so I have two questions. One of them I actually posted up on the community. I haven't received any responses, so I don't know if people haven't seen it or if anyone here happens to know. And that is FTP Upload, the action, the very last field where it indicates the files to upload. There's no direction as to what to put in there. And my question is, what do you put in there? Is it a relative path? Is it a full, is it a URL path? Is it a full physical path?
So I'm guessing that you're having problems with this, or else, I mean, you didn't
Not,
just.
no, I haven't used it yet. There is a potential that I'm going to be creating something where I'm going to need to send files to an FTP server. But before I even offer that as a potential solution to this particular problem, I just, I saw this and I'm like, how do I actually use this? And, would it work for the situation that I'm setting up? Because the other question too is, it doesn't say if it supports tokens in the file list or not. If it doesn't, then this probably won't work for me because I'm looking at a dynamic situation where I don't know what files I'll have to upload each time. It's not always the same file name. So, those were the questions. Is it
Yep.
dynamic? And what exactly do you put in there?
So I'll start by saying I've never used the action.
Hmm.
Anybody call have used this action? My gut feeling is that this will probably accept any of those that you talked about, the relative paths and tokens and things like that, because uh, that would be our typical pattern. But it also, um, until we did it, we wouldn't know. Um,
And probably IDs, file IDs.
Probably. Um, and I'm trying to think. I'm not sure I have access. We'd have to find an FTP site to push to. I don't know where. I mean, I think this could be tested pretty easily. I just don't have it. Don't know.
Yeah, that's my situation is this is a possible solution, but right now I don't have an FTP server that I can play with, and I'm not about to ask our networking people to set one up, um, to test it and only, have it blow up or not work the way I'm envisioning. So I was just hoping that someone had some insight on its use. before I put too much effort into this.
Well, so looks like there might be a free server to send to. That's interesting. I don't know what a DLP file is. So it might be possible to use something like this to test an FTP site.
Okay,
And
I will take a look at that.
I suspect with half an hour of investment, you could figure out whether it works. And if you run into trouble, of course, you can put a support ticket in, and then I'll be engaged in it.
Okay, so that's number one.
Yes.
Second question actually is about PowerShell, strangely enough, when you were just referring to that,
Yep.
is there are some potential changes that I'm looking to make to IIS using a PowerShell script that is automatically executed. But then my question is there a way, or in what context, I should say, is this PowerShell script being run in? Because there is a possibility that these commands will need an elevated permission level in order to function, being that it's modifying IIS directly.
Yep. So I don't know. I am assuming that it's running under the identity of the app pool, because I don't know how else it would know to get how else it would know to get an identity. But that's an interesting question.
Well, my whole thing is that if that's the case, like that's what I'm saying. I didn't know if it defaulted to an elevated permission state or if it used the app pool. But if it is using the app pool, then my question is, well, then I should say my next statement would be, could Plantain app consider a feature request slash update to allow the PowerShell action to request elevated permission, like have a checkbox that says, run as an elevated permission of some, something to that effect. Because otherwise, if what you're trying to run requires that and there's no way to do it, then obviously you're not going to be able to run that script through Plantain app. It would still have to be a manually.
And from I would suspect from a security standpoint, it would be trying to figure out a way to do that without giving you more rights than you're. I mean, how would something like that work? So let's see if this will tell us the answer to the question. Doing an upload to FTP.
You're nobody.
I don't know. So I could answer the question with 10 minutes work, but I don't think I can get it in the -1 minutes that we have left. So I'll take a look at this after the call, Ben, and if I find an answer to it, then I will I'll dig in and also trying to deal with ask about elevation. I don't know. I suppose I'm just guessing that you might be able to put something into your web config that would be protected, that you could then use in a PowerShell to gain additional rights. And that part, I'll research that a little bit. So
Much
sorry, I don't have
appreciated.
a straightforward answer, but there might be
Yeah, no,
a
that's
way to
fine.
do that.
I'm not a PowerShell person myself, so this is a learning experience for me.
Absolutely. Okay, with that, we've coasted into and over the end of our hour. So thanks for showing up. We'll do this again next week at the Low Code Campfire, and we will see you then. Thanks all.